So we are live and we're also recording. We're just going to wait for a couple of minutes to allow people to log on so that before we begin. So welcome to all of you who are logging on. I'm Stefano Gennarini with CFAM. We're going to wait for just a couple of minutes while we allow people to log on, and then we'll begin. It's 11 a.m. now. We're going to allow people to log in, give them some time. So we'll give them 2 more minutes and then we'll start. So 1 more minute and we'll begin. Just letting everybody have some time to log on. Hi, welcome to everybody. We're just going to wait for a few more seconds to give some more time to those who are logging on, and then we'll begin. Okay, I think it's 2 minutes past 11. We're going to start. Welcome to everyone. My name is Stefano Gennarini. I am the Vice President for Legal Studies at the Center for Family and Human Rights. And today we have a very interesting seminar together with some real experts on pro-life policy in the Hill and internationally. January 20th marked the 1-year anniversary of President Joe Biden taking over the White House. And in 1 year, there have been many changes to federal policies, and this includes on the pro-life front. And so rather than raising our hands in the air and running around like headless chickens, screaming foul, we'd like to have a conversation today to analyze what these changes and ask the questions of how they matter for the present and for the future. And to have that conversation, I have some wonderful experts with me today, beginning with Tom McCluskey from Catholic Vote, and he is now a director of government affairs there, but he is a long-time pro-life lobbyist in Washington, D.C. I think, in fact, you made some fancy list in the Hill as the most influential pro-life lobbyist or something of that order. We also have Doreen Denny, who's an expert on the Hill process. She's a senior advisor at Concerned Women for America. And also with us is our own Rebecca Oas, our director of research at CFAM. Welcome to all. And let's begin a little bit with setting the scene for when Biden took over the presidency 1 year ago. Tom, Biden took over from Trump, who has been called by many the most pro-life president in U.S. history. Why is that? Why did he deserve that title, and why?
I have to tell you, originally when people started giving him that title, because they were giving that title to President Trump about as quickly as President Obama won his Nobel Prize. Like it was before he actually accomplished anything. However, Donald Trump quickly started working hard to earn that title, and a lot through personnel, and allowing those personnel to implement policy for decades, beginning under Ronald Reagan. You saw something called the Mexico City policy, which some people within the Trump administration was like, why limit ourselves just to the spending? Mexico City policy affects it protects taxpayers for paying for abortions and abortionists overseas, except not all. Doesn't protect all the funds that go over. And President Trump decided, let's protect it all. And he renamed the policy the Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance Policy, and got that through right away. On top of that, President Trump made a tremendous strides in conscience, even forming an Office of Civil Rights for Conscience within HHS. His Department of Justice worked hard to protect the states, to allow them to do what they want to do and give them the freedom to be pro-life. There were, if you remember under President Obama, there were a number of states that tried to defund Planned Parenthood, Texas, Tennessee, and a few others. And the Obama administration responded by bypassing the states and directly funding Planned Parenthood in those states. And President Trump put a stop to that. But I think what really earns him the title, and it's one that he won't earn until July, is his judicial nominations. He put hundreds of what we hope are strict constitutionalists on the courts. And on the Supreme Court level, he added almost unprecedented 3 judges to be able to put up. And the jury is still out on of course, those judges, except we certainly hope that with the Texas case, the Mississippi case, Dobbs, which we should see a decision by July, that he will have earned, by that point, he will have earned his title of the most pro-life president ever.
Let's just clarify for those who are listening to us from abroad, because we have people listening in from abroad, how significant the judicial nominations are here in the United States, because people will be familiar with their own legal systems and political systems about overreach from the executive and the judiciary to promote abortion. And but they may not know the exact context of what's happened in the United States since 1973. So, Tom, if you could just go into that a little bit.
Right, and thank you for that. It's the way the United States government was set up. It was a system of checks and balances. You have the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And at times throughout history, different branches in the United States seem to have a little bit more power or a little bit more say over others. And some of those checks and balances, though, is the executive branch gets to name judges on the federal level all the way up to the Supreme Court. And what you hope to do is to place judges that, what you hope to do is place judges that are fair, except a lot of it does play, the philosophy of the president nominating does play a lot into those nominations. Over the last few years in the United States, especially since 1973, U.S. abortion policy has been decided by the courts. And it's been it hasn't been good for life. Because even Republican administrations would nominate judges that did not believe that life should be protected at all stages. Even Ronald Reagan, who I invoked earlier, he nominated judges. He gave us the great Antonin Scalia, and he elevated Judge Rehnquist, but he also gave us Sandra Day O'Connor. And Republicans have notoriously been not all that great when it comes to judges, with few exceptions. Clarence Thomas currently sitting on being one of them. but even some that we saw under, and Judge Alito, I think is one that a number of us would applaud. But then even Donald Trump gave us a couple of question marks. But the main thing that we look to the judicial branch right now is to cede some of that power back over abortion policy, back to the legislators, back to the states. We believe personally that the closer abortion policy, we believe all life should be protected. And we think that the closer the government is, like local governments and all, are more likely to respond in a pro-life nation by protecting the unborn in that way.
And that's what makes it so significant, of course, that Trump nominated conservatives to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court is the organ which has the power to restore the abortion question to the states so that states can protect life. And Doreen, so let's say we've established some of the reasons why Trump was considered such a pro-life president. Please feel free to add there. But how has Biden changed that the situation since he came in a year ago? How far have the federal policies come from the policies that Trump had in place 1 year ago?
Well, thank you, Stefano, for the opportunity to be here today. I would say it's a 180-degree reversal. I mean, he came in from day one, pledging to dismantle everything that the Trump administration had did to promote life. That he's done that through executive orders. He's done that through the appointments he's made to federal agencies. He certainly is just supporting alongside everything happening in the Democratic-controlled Congress right now, which with Nancy Pelosi and the speakership in the House has been as radical and extreme on abortion as any previous leadership in the country and in our nation. And so what we've seen happen at a very rapid pace, frankly, is a federal bureaucracy that's been ready to go to write new rules, to repeal the rules. Think about the Title X family planning program, which the Trump administration was very diligent in ensuring was consistent with the statute that did not allow for any of the dollars to go to an organization that was promoting abortion. They've completely redone that, reversed those. The fetal tissue research that we ensured had to have very strong policies against using aborted babies in research. They completely dismantled those rules. We're seeing it in the budget, the first budget that he presented to the Congress, to strip the Hyde Amendment from all federal policy and HHS, Health and Human Services programming, so that funds could be used for abortion. To make permanent an expansion of Obamacare mandates, allowing for Medicaid to be used and Obamacare to be used for abortion coverage. That was kind of put in place, and unfortunately through COVID, some of the COVID bills, but they want to do that and by every means possible. And I think that you see there's no restraint in this administration to the extent that they'll go to allow for the promotion and the of abortion and unfortunately lack of protections for young women. The REMS, the risk evaluation management strategy for the FDA with chemical abortion, it's completely been dismantled. So that chemical abortion can now be mail ordered. So this is it's a travesty. It literally is a direct assault on life. And frankly, we're weeping every day. I mean, the only thing standing between these radical policies taking full effect in our country right now is the courts in some cases, and what's happening and sort of suspending some work from the courts, and a Congress that has a Republican stronghold, frankly, and a small margin to not allow some of these policies to get across the finish line.
Doreen, could you just explain what a mail order abortion is? Just because I don't think many of our listeners will actually be up to speed on that.
Sure. Well, it has always been the case that for pills that have been dispensed, abortifacients, or in this case, the chemical abortion, misoprostone, and to be dispensed, you had to do that under the direction of a doctor, under seeing a doctor personally, and ensuring things like the place in which you are pregnant, like how far along you are, because there are significant risks for women to take any kind of chemical abortion pill at the wrong time, and also whether or not you have a certain condition that would require, could put you at larger risk based on your blood type. And so this is now under the guise of the, what was COVID, telemedicine, people shouldn't be going to doctors, allowing for women to get pills dispensed over telehealth through computer engagement, and then having pills mailed to you. Now we know that there are organizations like Aid Access internationally that have been trying to skirt the rules for years and mail ordering pills to women. But now Planned Parenthood is in the game, and states are allowing for this to happen. Some states, frankly, are not allowing it to happen, and we're working at the state level to make sure that doesn't happen. But the danger here is that you're not under the care of a physician, that you're not being monitored, and frankly, women can hemorrhage. There's a lot of risks associated with this, but unfortunately, and this gets back into the personnel category, the FDA commissioner that's now been nominated to take the helm of the Food and Drug Administration was the individual who, under Obama years, started relaxing these rules and only requiring that deaths associated with chemical abortion would be reported. So we have really bad data about the extent of risks, and there's not good information for women. And now the fact that we're going to be doing this, in such a remote way as through the mail only increases the dangers.
So we're talking about women ordering abortion on Amazon, basically.
Well, I don't know all the methods and the suppliers through which they can do this, but the point is that we're doing it in a way that is completely minimizing, if not completely negating, the extent of the danger to young women. We're lying to them about using them and how to use them, and we have no way of helping and making sure that women are not put in danger because it's done at the wrong time in the wrong way. And not supervised.
Well, you certainly hope that at the very least, there's some agency that will track these developments. Otherwise, it really constitutes the perfect crime. You're just administering pills all around, and nobody's keeping track of who's taking them and where and how. Rebecca, we've looked a little bit at the domestic side of things and what pro-abortion policies that the Biden administration has put in place at the domestic level. How about internationally? How big a change has there been from what Trump did and what Biden is doing? And you go ahead and talk about what Trump did that distinguished him from previous Republican administrations.
Sure. Well, thanks a lot, Stefano. And it's so good to see Tom and Doreen. I guess to piggyback a little bit on some of what they talked about, Tom talked about the Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance policy, otherwise known as the Mexico City policy, that President Trump reinstated and expanded from what it had been under previous Republican administrations. And of course, the expansion from just the family planning funding to the entirety of global health really reflected the reality that the abortion movement used to be sort of housed within the family planning world. Then it sort of spread to maternal health, and now it's involved, these groups have sort of metastasized all over the place into, women's empowerment and girls' education. And so the expansion of the policy really reflected the fact that the fight has spread to all different areas that you wouldn't necessarily think to look. And so that, the expansion of that policy was certainly one of Trump's great achievements and one of the first things he did when he came into office. Also, President Trump's State Department decided to do, or they did the Commission on Unalienable Rights, which was really sort of a deep exploration on how the project of human rights and how we in the US think about human rights, compares to the international context, and also how sometimes especially at some of these UN institutions, the concept of human rights has really been distorted, to create rights that there's not consensus about, and frankly, that are hugely controversial. Things like a right to abortion, which of course does not exist internationally, despite the assertions of abortion groups that it does. Certainly another huge achievement under the Trump administration was the Geneva Consensus Declaration. This also under Mike Pompeo, at the Secretary of State, which is a declaration signed by more than 30 countries, including at the time the United States, that basically just asserts what is true, that there is no international human right to abortion, that we should do all we can to improve women's health, maternal health overseas, that the family, is the natural and fundamental group unit of society, which again is language coming from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, one of the founding documents of the UN, which should not be controversial, but unfortunately has become more so as the LGBT movement is trying to, redefine the definition of the family in international law. And so these were some of the, the big international achievements the Trump administration had. Also, rewriting internal government policies that govern how we do foreign aid, including policies on gender, to focus on women and girls and not to have that gender term sort of redefined in a much more nebulous and non-binary way. And so, as the previous panelists mentioned, one of the main things that Biden did right upon entering office is to reverse as much as possible by executive order the policies of the Trump administration, basically rescinding the Mexico, pulling the United States out of the Geneva Consensus Declaration, changing, rewriting the gender policy and other policies that had been rewritten under Trump. So basically, to the extent that executive power was used to promote a pro-life position in our foreign policy, those have been reversed. So certainly, and of course, dissolving the Commission on Unalienable Rights as well. Certainly in terms of personnel appointments, appointing radical pro-abortion people to different positions within government, firing pro-life people from presidential commissions that had been appointed under President Trump. Another thing that has happened.
Sorry, Rebecca, could you just make some examples of for example, firing of pro-life appointees to federal commissions, as well as some of the radical appointments that he's made in his administration?
Sure. Well, one example of firing a pro-life person, there's a man named Kurt Kondrick, who has been a longtime disability rights advocate, particularly for the rights of people with Down syndrome. His own daughter has Down syndrome, which is what sort of launched him into this. And looking at, the very discriminatory policies that allow for the abortion at later gestational ages, for example, of children who've been diagnosed with disabilities like Down syndrome. And so he had been working very hard within the disability presidential commission, and he was sort of unceremoniously let go when Biden came into office. With regard to some of the appointments, I think one that has to be highlighted is the recent, well, she hasn't been appointed officially yet, but the nomination of the pro-abortion lawyer, Sarah Cleveland, as a lead advisor to the State Department. This is a person who has certainly argued that there is an international right to abortion, and who would be bringing that mentality to her work at the State Department if confirmed. But certainly, he's set up, basically a council on gender that has been sort of his way of interfacing with abortion groups, both domestically and internationally. And, basically just, appointing to all levels of government people who share that mentality. One other thing that I would want to mention, just sort of broadly about the difference between the Biden administration and the Trump administration, is just sort of the posture toward multilateral institutions, UN agencies, and the like. Trump was very notably a little standoffish, shall we say, from things like the World Health Organization, which of course, partly due to its mishandling of COVID, but he also defunded the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. and basically just, had more of a skeptical attitude toward these multilateral bodies, which, again, once we fund them, there's really no accountability to know how that money is spent. And we've, certainly our organization has documented the many different ways in which they promote radical social agendas in countries where, where they do the most work, which of course, most of us in the United States are unaware of because, we're a wealthy country, but a lot of developing countries receive a great deal of programming, shall we say, from UN Women, the World Health Organization, the United Nations Population Fund, UNICEF. And so the Biden administration has certainly expressed more eagerness to fund these big multilateral, multi-stakeholder programs that certainly, if they don't outright promote abortion, they certainly work with organizations that are doing that on the ground.
Yeah, maybe it's worth pointing out here from what I've observed is that Democrats tend to want to work internationally on all social issues, generally through partnerships with other governments and organizations, philanthropists, groups, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations. And they work through these partnerships where nobody really is accountable to anybody. I mean, there's no democratic oversight. There's no political oversight over these partnerships. They self-govern. The sovereign countries simply give their money to these partnerships, but then the partnerships within themselves have their own governance mechanisms and decision-making processes. Thereby, no U.S. voter, no voter from any country in Europe or no voter from any country in the world has any oversight or over what's going on, and these funds certainly are not directly politically accountable to anyone. So it creates big issues. We've had the big scandal now with the Wuhan lab and the funding of it. Certainly U.S. funds were going there, and nobody knew how the money was being used. I mean, that's the kind of example of mischief that can happen when nobody's accountable. So it's always something to watch out for. I know many congressmen aren't very familiar with these funding mechanisms. Generally speaking, they're more interested in the substance of how U.S. funds are spent. So when somebody from the United Nations or somebody from an organization comes and says, we need money to address gender-based violence or violence against women or education for children, the congressman will generally be willing and desiring to be helpful. And they'll be less worried about the details of how the money is actually spent procedurally. Can you all address a little bit what more can be done to prevent sort of a lack of accountability for U.S. funds, specifically on the issue of abortion? Do we know how the federal monies are spent when it comes to groups that promote and perform abortions abroad?
I'll try to jump into this one. Previously, we have had members of Congress ask the GAO to do reports on where a lot of this funding is going. But what we're also seeing is a lot of the funding is not accounted for. It's gotten even worse under the Biden administration, where we're seeing hundreds of billions of dollars in what was supposed to be COVID relief funds that are going to bad actors. And we don't know who those bad actors are. Are they drug kingpins? Are they abortionists or some other nefarious type of job? But what we do find is that, at least with these GAO reports, we have that baseline. And personally, what I would like to see is that go Donald Trump a little bit further. And I think the Congress, one of the first things they have to do if Republicans take over again and there's a pro-life majority is oversight, because there has been absolutely no oversight of this administration, and the media has decided to cede all their power to the Biden administration as well. So even they aren't keeping tabs.
I know, for example, we've had the Mexico City policy for many years. How effective was it, and was there ever a way to track how money was spent under the Mexico City policy? Rebecca or Doreen, either of you?
Well, I can jump in here and make a few comments. I mean, certainly the effectiveness of the Mexico City policy, I think, is very clearly demonstrated in part by just how much the abortion groups feel the pinch and complain accordingly. You know, certainly you will hear a lot of the pro-abortion groups talk about how it has set back progress in lobbying governments in other countries to change their laws. And so it certainly is having a chilling effect on their work overseas. I think the work, it could be even more. The effect could be even greater if there were more oversight as far as looking not just at the top line grant recipients, but also the sub-grantees, and, you know, tightening up some of the reporting requirements, for example, within the State Department.
So could you just explain that for somebody who's not familiar with those terms? What is a top grantee and what is a subprime?
Sure. Well, so applying for government, you know, for U.S. Foreign aid money is not a trivial process, especially if you're a small group that's working, you know, on the ground in a country and you don't have, you know, a whole department dedicated to writing grants. And so what often happens is that, you know, large organizations with the capacity to do it will apply for these very large grants, and then they will then farm out some of the work to smaller sub-grantees, as they're called, or subprimes. So you've got the primes are the big ones, and then the subprimes are the ones that then, you know, receive allocated money through the primes. And so the prime grant recipients, you know, certainly have to fill out certain documentation to, you know, to demonstrate that they're compliant with not just, you know, the Mexico City policy, but any other requirements, you know, that are attached to receiving U.S. government money, U.S. taxpayer money. But sometimes, you know, there's just not good bookkeeping, shall we say, within, say, USAID as to what exactly the projects are that the subprime groups are doing, and, you know, how successful they are, and, you know, how compliant they are with the policy. And so, you know, Congress could certainly call upon, you know, USAID to, you know, have mandatory reporting that goes much deeper into these things. And that would potentially be a way of, you know, increasing the impact of the policy.
Doreen, do you want to add anything about accountability to Congress in particular?
Yeah, and I would just, yeah, and I think it's really just kind of a corollary on the domestic front with this Title X program for family planning under Health and Human Services, because this is a program that, again, by statute from the beginning was always specifically said that the money would not go to promote or provide abortion. And what this administration has done in basically reinterpreting in their rules what's available, you know, at the time that Trump took basically realigned the rules with the actual statute, Planned Parenthood made a big deal about them pulling out of the program because they wouldn't comply. I mean, it only reinforced that their intention was not to disconnect any kind of abortion services from anything else that they did. And so that was really clear. It was clear on its face because they're a prime contractor now under this administration with the rules that have been changed. And again, we can track this, how much money is going out to these grants. I mean, you can start to see the listing of these now as they're coming forward. But you know, we don't often hear about it. I mean, one of the things that the Biden administration did to respond to the Texas heartbeat bill that was passed was to reinforce the Title X program. Like they put in almost $20 million additional dollars to Texas specifically to provide kind of an end run service, you know, support mechanism that would hopefully provide, you know, some prop up for abortion providers that might be feeling the pinch while this was all under legal, up for legal questioning. And so, you know, these are just the kinds of things I think that Congress, unfortunately, the lag time to get the results from a GAO study can be 2 or 3 years. I mean, you don't have enough real-time data, but you do have the listing of grants and where they're going. And as Rebecca indicated, if we have to follow the money, because if you don't start looking and really making that an objective and a requirement, These, things are pushed way down the road, and it gets baked into the process of these grantees. And the grantees that have been previous grantees sometimes have the advantage being a repeat grantee. And so this is what we're facing. And the Biden administration's basically picked up and pushed the gas at an acceleration on where Obama was. So, what we tried to correct over the 4 years of the Trump administration, there was a lot of catch up first just to undo what was done. And where we find ourselves now is that Biden's taken it and even gone the extra mile. And so that's going to take time, and it's going to take a Congress that is led by a different party, and it's going to take serious work to really get ourselves into a position where we can literally inform the American taxpayer about what's happening with their money.
That's
if I could just, Stefano, if I could just
go
jump in
ahead.
here and make one quick remark too about oversight, and circling back to the idea of these giant multilateral, multi-stakeholder partnerships, and just how much difficulty we have, tracking where the money goes within our own, grantee and sub-grantee structure that's strictly coming straight out of our government to our grantees directly. And how much, compared to that, when you start sending money to these giant partnerships, there is no accountability, and we don't have the ability to, to demand it really, unless, by virtue of withholding our funding, we can, manage to twist arms. And, the Mexico City policy does not apply to these multilateral institutions. One thing the Biden administration did for the very first time was to fund a sub sort of fund of UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund, called UNFPA Supplies. And this particular sort of sub fund is, it's the arm that, brings contraceptives and maternal health and other tools, into country. And one of the things that they also provide are the pills used for abortions, mifepristone and misoprostol, and manual vacuum aspiration tools that, of course, can be used, in case of managing miscarriages, but also can be used to perform abortions, and often are overseas. And, it should be noted that, in longstanding U.S. law, the Helms Amendment, which blocks all direct funding for the promotion and provision of abortion, that has long been interpreted to bar the U.S. from using its own funding from purchasing MVAs, manual vacuum aspirators, because it's understandable that if you put those into place, there's no way to prevent them from being used for abortion. And so this is sort of almost like an end run around that policy. If you start funding UNFPA supplies, you can't tell them, but not for that.
That's very interesting. We could go really into the details of the policy here, and to why the complementarity of the Helms Amendment and the Mexico City policy, because the Helms Amendment prevents U.S. taxpayer money from being used specifically for performing or promoting abortion, but the Mexico City policy bars the organizations receiving U.S. funds from performing and promoting abortion. And in some ways, the Mexico City policy is much more effective, as you can see, because of the difficulties and because of money is fungible. But so I just want to we want to cover still have a lot of ground to cover. Specifically, where do you guys think the Biden administration is headed on abortion? Right now, we have a situation where there's a lot of a stalemate. There's a sort of a stalemate in Congress, thankfully, because of the filibuster. In many ways, the filibuster is the only thing standing between U.S. policy and an abortion abyss. Let's be honest, at the legislative level. But where do you think the Biden administration wants to go with abortion? Doreen?
Well, they want to codify what we understood to be Roe v. Wade, certainly not federally. They, and even beyond that, I think the Women's Health Protection Act, the so-called Women's Health Protection, I think embodies the extremism of really the left's agenda on this, including the Biden administration. Joe Biden, for whatever moderation that he had as a United States Senator and having supported the Hyde Amendment and other pro-life riders in the past, he's completely thrown all that out the window. And he is 100% in lockstep with what the Democrat radical Congress wants to do on abortion. And that is really to tie the hands of any state from having any restrictions on abortion and fully allowing for funding, full federal taxpayer funding of abortion on demand for any reason. And I think that like you said, while that is there's maybe a stop, it's not going to be possible to get that over the finish line in this Congress. I think that you're seeing the capacity of this administration to use any means possible at the levers that they have of power through their own programs. And it comes a lot of times in very vague language that might even be a part of the budget appropriations process, where it opens the door to interpretation, and they will interpret it as allowing for the funding, the financing, the expansion, the promotion, providing it to providers of abortion in every case. We're seeing that in every way. I mean, even another response they had to Texas was to use the church amendments, which were the riders in federal government that said anybody that opposes the abortion, they can't be forced to perform an abortion. We have to have conscience rights for individuals. Well, they turned that on its head and said, no, well, the church amendments also does the reverse. It should allow for the protection of abortion providers to provide abortions. And so, they want to use the enforcement tools of HHS and the Department of Justice as a weapon, and they're weaponizing any kind of policy in that they can use that they have at their disposal to promote an agenda that they're not going to be able to fully get through Congress, but what is ultimately will continue to be their goal.
Just to clarify for those who don't know, the Women's Health Protection Act was a law proposed by the Democrats in Congress as a response to the possibility that the Supreme Court will strike down Roe v. Wade, the 1973 decision that made abortion a constitutional right in the United States. And the law is as radical as it gets. The Women's Health Protection Act not only would codify abortion on demand, it would also cease to describe women as pregnant women. It talks about pregnant persons because, of course, transgender persons, according to the law, can become pregnant. It also, as Doreen was describing, attacks the conscience rights of health providers. And it's part of a new generation of anti-life laws that we've seen all around the world, including in Argentina and New Zealand. Tom, you had an interesting take earlier when we were speaking on the Dobbs decision and what could happen in the United States politically if the Supreme Court does indeed reverse its decision in Roe v. Wade.
Right. I am somewhat optimistic, except you pose the question of what will Joe Biden want to do. I think it's what Joe Biden's going to be forced to do by a number of the pro-abortion zealots in his party, including a lot in his administration. They know they're losing in the United States. They know the Supreme Court, it's probably going to be, and I hope this doesn't come back to bite me, an optimistic pro-life decision that we should be happy with come July. Just look at, Doreen mentioned the Texas heartbeat bill, and just look how they responded. The Texas heartbeat bill became a national issue right around the end of August, September 1st. On September 1st, President Biden issued a statement condemning the law. On September 6th, Attorney General Merrick Garland issued a statement saying how the DOJ is going to use all legal options, including a couple like the FACE Act, which are very questionably constitutional, if they're constitutional or not. The DOJ then filed suit in Texas. And then on September 17th, so in a matter of 2 weeks, the whole Biden administration was motivated to speak out. But the HHS secretary also announced new action, some of which that Doreen mentioned. When Joe Biden was running and Kamala Harris was running before she became his running mate, she mentioned about how using the DOJ Office of Civil Rights to come down on states that would go after or that try to push pro-life laws. I think we're actually, once they realize if Republicans do take over Congress, there's not going to be a lot that Congress can do. Not that they're doing much right now, thank goodness. But I think what we're going to see is it's going to probably put the law to the side, which is weird to say about the DOJ, and use whatever power they think they have to go after states that try to push pro-life laws. And that's regardless of what the Supreme Court says.
And that's really interesting that you say that, because that brings back how important the filibuster is. Why is it that abortion advocates want to get rid of the filibuster so badly, and that even the president Biden has said that he wants to get rid of the filibuster?
It's for some of the abortion, the pro-abortion side. It's one of the few things that we seem to still agree on. A number of them do not want to get rid of the filibuster because they understand. We have never had a full pro-life Congress, at least not one to my liking. So if you get rid of the filibuster, even if Republicans are in charge, I do not think that would be a boon for pro-lifers. However, you will have pro-life policy that currently, like Mexico City policy, the Protect Life policy, switches back and forth with each presidency. Now you'd see pro-life policies, including healthcare decisions, going back and forth every Congress if you got rid of the filibuster. That's no way to resolve this issue. It should go back to the states as originally intended. And I think where we have the best chance, except without the filibuster, pro-lifers and pro-family folks are in dire straits.
One of the interesting things that I've seen under the Biden administration is the support for abortion as a human right. I think President Biden has been the first U.S. president to support abortion as an international right. He did this by putting the weight of the White House behind the Women's Health Protection Act. I mean, which declares abortion to be recognizes abortion as an international human right. I think that's the first time. Have we seen anything else from the Biden administration, Rebecca, to support abortion internationally as a human right?
Well, we certainly have seen the reinstatement of reproductive rights, which of course includes abortion, in the annual State Department's human rights reports, which it issues on each individual country every year. That had been put in for the first time under former President Obama and then taken out under Trump. So Biden has, reinstated that. So this is another one of those things that seems to switch back and forth with administrations now. But what that basically means is that the State Department is now tasked with collecting information about, the state of reproductive rights in different countries and reporting on that. And of course, these State Department reports are very important in sort of holding countries to account on their human rights obligations. Certainly.
I think there was also something in the UPR that Biden did. I think in the very same review of the United States by the Human Rights Council, the Biden administration reversed what the position that the Trump administration took. Am I right, Rebecca?
I believe so. So the UPR, the Universal Periodic Review, is a mechanism by which the human rights record of every country, all 193 countries at the UN, goes under review every 4 or 5 years by every other country in the world and are given non-binding recommendations on how they might improve. Every time the United States comes up, some countries, particularly Nordic countries, Western European countries, pressure us to liberalize our abortion, our pro-life policies overseas. In particular, urging us to carve out exceptions to the Helms Amendment, which I mentioned earlier is the law that prohibits U.S. foreign aid from being used to directly fund abortions or the promotion of abortion. And just to get a little bit in the weeds, there's also the Hyde Amendment, which is the domestic sort of version of the same thing that prevents U.S. funding from funding abortions internally in the country. The difference, though, the one key difference between the Helms and Hyde Amendments is that the Hyde Amendment has particular carve-outs for, life, health, some of the abortion exceptions that we see in law, whereas the Helms Amendment does not. It has no exception under particular grounds. It just says, the U.S. is not going to fund abortion overseas. And so there have been a lot of pressure from abortion groups and from some countries to redefine or reinterpret the Helms Amendment to include such carve-outs. And the U.S. has always, when pressured to change its stance on that, has always said, no, that's not in accordance with our law. We're not going to do that. So they don't support that recommendation. They note it. And even under the Obama administration, those recommendations had not been accepted. So when Biden came in, he responded favorably for the first time to these types of recommendations with, sort of the caveat that obviously, this is the position of the administration, but it would require an act of Congress to change the law. So, but But yes, no, he's certainly positioned his intention to do a lot of these things, even to the extent that he can.
Yeah, and if he said that even if Congress does not act, then the Biden administration will do everything to undermine the Helms Amendment wherever possible, or to limit its application. So we're seeing, so this is where we see that the Biden administration is headed. But I think this is more on a substantive level. I think one of my biggest concerns, having worked with officials in the Trump administration on trying to advance pro-life policy, one of my biggest concerns, of course, is the legacy of the Biden administration within the federal bureaucracy. That all the measures taken in place at a bureaucratic level will have a permanent effect on the federal government, so that all federal agencies are essentially aligned in an anti-life, pro-abortion direction. This is my gravest concern, and we see this especially with the gender policies of the Biden administration. We saw in October, the Biden administration came out with these gender policies, and it requires every federal agency. We're talking about, the federal government with the $4 trillion budget, annual budget. So we're talking about, millions of employees working to advance this. It requires all federal agencies to align their policies with gender policies, which means promotion of abortion, promotion of transgender issues, and they have to come up with implementation plans, strategic planning and budgeting, policy and program development, measurement and data management and training. This is the kind of thing that when you ensconce it, when you make it a part of a bureaucracy, it stays there for generations. So it's sort of, the entire federal bureaucracy is being populated by what you call gender advisors or gender specialists. So these gender apparatchiks, you could call them, will have a lasting effect on the US government. And I'm very concerned about that. What can we do if, for example, come 2022, come the end of this year, Republicans do gain an advantage in Congress? What can be done to slow this down, to prevent it from becoming a real problem going forward? Tom, maybe we can start with you.
Great, thank you. Because you pose a very tough question. During the Clinton administration, the Office of Special Counsel changed the gender classifications, and when the George W. Bush administration appointee came in, he was told by career people this was done illegally, entering in new classifications, including sexual identity. So he changed it back. And during the whole Bush administration, then this man, Scott Block, was persecuted even by the Biden administration or the Bush administration itself. So you are right, once these policies are in effect, it is hard, even under a new administration, to change them back. Sunlight, I think, is our best opportunity. I think a lot of the work that CWA has done, and Doreen might be able to address this better, is in exposing and also just showing the consequences of some of these policies. CWA has been very good in showing the consequences on women's sports. And what we have to do, though, is have members of Congress who are brave, because there aren't a lot of brave ones out there right now. And those who have PACs and who get involved in elections should start asking people running for office now.
Doreen, what do you think of the gender strategies going forward? Are we ever going to be able to get rid of them? Can we slow them down or hamper their implementation somehow?
Well, I think one of the things we do see and know is that once Americans understand what's happening, they're opposed, right? They don't like it. That we're seeing this. We saw this with this critical race theory idea, where we were using race-based history lessons for children, suggesting that we're a country of oppressed or oppressors. even the gender, allowing for, any claim for identity to be used in the context of, bathrooms and locker rooms and sports. People don't like this. And the more that we can bring it to light, the more I think people can be emboldened to say no. We see this, what happened with one of the things that we uncovered was in the National Institutes for Health and a study that was allowing for puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to go into children. And through the legitimacy of the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, which is under HHS, was allowing for suggesting, normalizing the idea that any claim for gender of a young child should be accommodated through medical treatment,
Okay.
And again, this is what's been behind the explosion of this industry in the United States, the legitimacy and the normalizing of it. But people don't like it. They know that it's harmful. And so I think that as much light as we can, as much courage as we can muster, and that's what we've been trying to call out as an organization, both from the governors of the states to members of Congress, certainly, and also just this administration. Because as you noted, Stefano, on day one, the administration came in and put down an executive order that led to all of these actions for these plans on gender and the alignment with a faulty decision by the United States Supreme Court, or an expansion of a decision on Bostock versus Clayton County, which gave transgender status under law. And so we're seeing this, it's going to continue to be a fight, I think, in all three branches of government, both the courts, the congressional and the executive branch. But we have to change the leadership. I mean, we cannot allow for any more than a 2024 sunset of this administration, and turning it over to the hands of people that are going to really turn this country back in the right direction. And of course, 2022, we have the best opportunity to start out with. I noticed one of the participants asked about Dan Lipinski, who was the only Democrat pretty much remaining in Congress that was pro-life. And of course, he got ousted in his primary. And we're going to continue to see that in the National Democrat Party to make sure that anybody that they elect is 100% in lockstep with the radical abortion agenda and agenda on these other issues. And so it really takes, what we're trying to do is energize parents and voters in this country to understand the consequences of who they elect, and hopefully we'll make some progress in this November.
Rebecca, internationally, what do you think of these gender strategies, of the directions? How easy or hard is it going to be to change the direction of the federal government in foreign policy?
Well, I guess I would maybe take a slight optimistic note just to look back at the Trump administration and what they were able to accomplish in the 4 years that they had. Terms like reproductive health, had become so just ingrained in UN policy since the 90s. And were basically, in most cases, if they'd been there before, they were just treated as, well, yeah, we're going to at least have a mention of that. And, it's normal, it's accepted, it's not going to change anything. And under Trump, we saw an increased, let's just say it was, make reproductive health controversial again, and countries were willing to push back on it because the US was leading the charge. And that term became, it became controversial even after it had been sort of just taken as part of the wallpaper for a while. And so I think with the US leading in the right direction, even terms like gender, and terms like reproductive health that are, euphemistic for so many terrible things, they can be made controversial and they can be pushed back against. And, that involves two things. It involves, on the one hand, strong leadership from countries that are global leaders, global funders of things like the US, but also, and really critically, education of average people about why these terms should be opposed and what the practical implications of these terms are, where the term gender is actually being used to harm women and girls, for example, as opposed to policies that, for women and girls that are meant to help them, replacing them, making them invisible in the policies that were supposed to be for them. And, certainly with reproductive health, showing how, reproductive health policies are harming women and girls, I'm just to circle back quickly to one thing Doreen talked about earlier with just the harm of taking all the safeguards away from the use of these dangerous abortion drugs. One thing I think we have to keep coming back to is that the more it's not, a case of a doctor actually giving pills directly to a woman, you take away the possibility that maybe, somebody else could be obtaining these drugs for a woman who is not consenting to their use. There have been cases, even in the US where men, usually, boyfriends, sometimes, fathers, or even, traffickers of women have, given women these drugs to induce an abortion against their will. And so this is another kind of abuse that can come in. But, bringing out these examples of where the harm is and making these terms controversial again, maybe under this administration, we won't have the US leadership we want, but we need to prepare for the next time we do.
That's very interesting that you bring in how international policy can change, and can change pretty quickly if with a new administration with a different direction, because of course the whole push for gender policies, including on the domestic level for us, comes from the international policy. The whole notion of gender was an international policy through the United Nations before it came into US law, before it came into US appropriations, and before Obama and now the Biden administration promulgated their own domestic gender policies. And so it's very interesting that, maybe the resolution of this problem domestically for us also may come through foreign policy. But of course, that would require some restraint from Congress from preventing Congress from adopting laws that will straitjacket future administrations from reversing some of the foreign policies of the Biden administration. And we see attempts to do that all the time. We see attempts to commandeer the executive in foreign policy matters at the United Nations all the time. So including through the Women's Health Protection Act. And so we have to make sure that that doesn't happen if we want to have a chance to create good foreign policies that will have a positive effect on our domestic policies. A very convoluted way to govern ourselves, but such is the state of self-government in these days. We have now spoken for over an hour, and I just want to. There's an issue right now in Congress that's very hot, and I'd like your quick comments and any closing remarks you may have. There's a Global Respect Act currently being considered by Congress. This is an act to essentially silence opponents of gender policies, the LGBT agenda internationally, so that anybody abroad who has any influence, civic leaders, religious leaders, who oppose transgender policies for children, or that kind of thing, would be barred from entering the United States, could have their assets frozen, essentially treated as a human rights abuser. This is, of course, to me, it's very concerning because we work internationally, and it's hard already to go up against the United States, but to go up against the United States knowing that penalties will be imposed on you is even harder. Do you guys think that Congress has an appetite for this law currently? Do you think it could be adopted, or will we be able to see this law defeated? Tom?
I think right now we are dealing with the Keystone Congress. Even their top priorities, they're having a hard time to get through. So I don't think this Congress has the appetite to pass anything of any type of substance. So be it good or bad. So I would say no. I wouldn't expect to see it.
Doreen?
Well, I'm looking at the House and the Senate differently. I mean, I think ultimately in terms of passage, probably not. But in the House, the danger here is, and it's because we've been engaging specifically with the Republican members of the committee, some of them who are, very ready to just kind of roll over on these questions, which, bills that have nice titles and suggest that you're protecting only against certain kind of violent, egregious situations. But we know, because we've read the bill, as you have, that the vagueness of the language takes this into directions that we don't want to go, and really could, in fact, I probably could be blacklisted if another country passed this, just because of what I've written in terms of opposition to male athletes, biological males competing in women's sports, as a denial of the liberties of a transgender athlete. And so it is dangerous. The problem that we have right now is getting focus and attention. This is the kind of bill that unfortunately the House would be put under what they call suspension of the rules potentially, which means that the ranking majority and minority agree to move it through the Congress. I think in this case, we've raised enough concern that we might have some opposition from the ranking members not to move it forward. But I'm telling you, talking just to the average Republicans on the committee, I think that they were clueless about the true intent and impact of this. And it's that kind of ignorance that leads to really bad policy, and why we can never just assume that something bad is not going to get advanced, even though we see the real danger and precedent that would be a true detriment to so many.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the Global Respect Act is an act that would impose a Magnitsky-style sanctions. So the Magnitsky Act, for those who don't know, it imposes sanctions on egregious human rights abusers. So people who cooperate with tyrannical leaders internationally to things like genocide, extrajudicial killings, torture, and that kind of thing. These kind of people would be barred from entering the United States and would have their assets frozen if they get on a State Department list. But what the Global Respect Act does is that it expands those same type of sanctions to much broader conduct, not just egregious human rights violations like extrajudicial killings, genocide, or torture. It would also include complicity in incitement to hatred, discrimination, broadly defined, which could include, for example, as Doreen was saying, advocacy against transgender access to bathrooms, or protection of children from transgender medical treatment, or requiring informed consent, requiring persons looking for treatment before hormone treatment, for example, to be adults, as opposed to teenagers or children. And so it's a very extreme piece of law that we know the Biden administration would weaponize against social conservatives all around the world. And it could really cripple the pro-life, pro-family cause internationally. And so we're hopeful that the cooler heads will prevail in Congress also on this. And that ultimately Joe Manchin will be on the right side of history. With that, we've gone already 5 minutes over, and I'm just going to say goodbye to you and thank you to all those who are participating and listening for us. This webcast will be available for streaming on CFAM's YouTube page, as well as our website, if you want to catch it later and share it. With that, I will greet you from CFAM, and I will give Doreen, Tom, and Rebecca a last word of goodbye.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been so good seeing all of you, and best wishes.
Appreciate all of you in the fight, and look forward to partnering.
Yes, thank you. Good to see you all, and love the work that CFAM does. And I'm glad CWA also works in the international field, but we certainly need more of that in the United States.
Thank you all again. And if you don't follow CFAM, please do. And if you can support us, also please do. Bye.